Daniel Carter stood in the massive assembly hall and felt his heart beating too fast. Around him sat 300 delegates from every corner of human space. Above them, cameras broadcast this moment to billions of people across dozens of worlds. He tried to keep his face calm, even though his hands wanted to shake. The Speaker of the United Earth Council cleared her throat and spoke into the microphone. Her voice echoed through the hall. She announced that after careful consideration, the council had selected their representative for the historic marriage alliance with the Valdrin sovereignty. Daniel already knew what she would say next. They had told him 3 days ago in a private meeting. Still, hearing his name spoken aloud made it feel suddenly real. The hall erupted in polite applause. Daniel stood up because that was what he was supposed to do. He walked to the podium. The cameras followed his every step. He was 32 years old and looked completely ordinary. Average height, brown hair that was always a bit messy, a face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. That was exactly why they chose him, or so they said. He gave a short speech that someone else had written. He talked about duty and peace and the hope for a better future. The words felt hollow in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway. When he finished, more applause filled the hall. Nobody asked him if he wanted this. Nobody asked if he was afraid. They just needed a volunteer, and he had raised his hand. The war with the Valdrin had lasted 30 years. Daniel had been a child when it started. He remembered the news broadcasts showing burning colonies and destroyed ships. He remembered his mother crying when his father never came home from the front lines. Billions had died on both sides before exhaustion finally forced both civilizations to the negotiating table. The peace treaty was fragile. Everyone knew it could break apart at any moment. The marriage was supposed to make the peace stronger. Daniel would marry Princess Kira of the Valdrin royal house. Their union would symbolize the joining of two peoples. It sounded nice in speeches, but Daniel knew the truth. He was being sent to live among aliens who had killed his people for 3 decades. He would spend the rest of his life on a world where humans were hated. He would never see Earth again. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood in his small apartment and packed his belongings. He did not have much to take. A few photos, some books, clothes that would probably be useless on an alien world. His sister Katie sat on his bed and watched him pack. She was 26 and looked so much like their mother that it hurt sometimes. Katie had been crying, but she tried to hide it. She asked Daniel if he was scared. He told her no, which was a lie. She asked if he would be able to send messages. He said yes, though they both knew communication between human and Valdrin space was limited and monitored. She asked when he would come home. He did not answer that question. Before he left, Katie hugged him tight. She whispered that she was proud of him. She said he was braver than anyone she knew. Daniel held her and tried to remember everything about this moment: the smell of her perfume, the sound of her voice, the feeling of home. Then he let go and walked out the door. The transport ship took him to a neutral space station on the border between human and Valdrin territory. The station was enormous, built by the Galactic Council to facilitate the peace negotiations. Daniel had a small room where he waited. For 3 days, he spent the time reading reports about Valdrin culture and trying not to think about what came next. On The third day, they told him it was time. He put on formal clothes that felt too tight around his collar. 2 diplomats escorted him through the station's corridors to a meeting room. The room was designed to be neutral, with furniture and decorations that would not favor either species. Large window showed the stars outside. Princess Kira was already there. Daniel had seen pictures of her, but they had not prepared him for meeting her in person. She was tall, nearly 6 and 1/2 ft, which was average for Valdrin. Her skin had a subtle blue tint that became more visible in certain light. Her eyes were amber-colored and seemed to look right through him. She wore a formal gown that was probably worth more than everything Daniel owned. She looked at him with an expression that was easy to read. Disappointment, disgust, barely hidden. She had expected someone impressive and instead got a plain bureaucrat who looked like he worked in an office. Daniel understood if he were in her position, forced to marry an alien to secure peace, he would want that alien to at least be someone important. They sat across from each other with translators and diplomats surrounding them. Princess Kira spoke first. Her voice was cold and formal. She said she understood the necessity of their arrangement. She made it clear this was a political alliance, nothing more. She expected minimal interaction outside of required public appearances. She would provide him quarters in the palace, but he should not expect warmth or companionship. Daniel listened and nodded. He gave equally formal responses. He said he understood and would respect her wishes. Inside, he felt something heavy settle in his chest. This was going to be even harder than he thought. He was going to spend his life married to someone who could barely stand to look at him. The meeting lasted 30 minutes. They signed documents that legally bound them together. Cameras recorded everything for the press releases. When it was over, Princess Kira left without saying goodbye. Daniel sat alone in the room for a while, staring at the stars and wondering what he had gotten himself into. The Valdrin ship that would take him to their home world was unlike anything humans built. It was massive and angular, designed to intimidate. Inside, everything was too large for human proportions. The crew ignored him except when absolutely necessary. He spent the 3-day journey in his quarters, a small room with a bed that was too big and air that smelled wrong. During the journey, Daniel allowed himself to think about who he really was. The official story said he was a low-level diplomat from the colonial administration, someone harmless and unthreatening, someone the Valdrin would not see as a danger. That story was true in a way. He had worked in the colonial administration for the past 2 years. Before that, though, he had been someone very different. Before becoming a diplomat, Daniel had been Commander Daniel Carter. He had served in Earth's Special Operations Division for 12 years. He had participated in over 200 missions during the war. He had skills that most people could not imagine. He knew 17 ways to kill a person with his bare hands. He could plan military operations that would make generals weep with envy. He had medals locked in a box that he would never wear again. Human government had not chosen him randomly. They needed someone who could survive in hostile territory, someone who could gather intelligence, someone who could protect himself if the Valdrin decided to break the treaty. But they also needed someone who could convincingly play the role of an ordinary, weak, human, someone the Valdrin would underestimate. Daniel was perfect for the job because he had spent his entire military career being underestimated. He looked at his reflection in the ship's window, plain face, soft hands. Or at least they looked soft now, gentle. Eyes, nothing about him suggested danger. He had worked hard to become this person. Every mannerism, every gesture was carefully designed to seem harmless. It was the best disguise he had ever worn. When the ship approached Valdrin Prime, Daniel stood at the window and watched the planet grow larger. It was beautiful. In an alien way, the cities gleamed like crystals. The oceans were green instead of blue. 3 moons hung in the sky. This would be his home now, this world, where everyone would look at him and see weakness. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for what came next. The ship landed at the Royal Spaceport. When the doors opened, heat and strain smells rushed in. Daniel walked down the ramp with his small bag of belongings. Palace guards waited for him, massive Valdrin in ceremonial armor. They looked at him with barely concealed contempt. One of them muttered something in their language. Daniel did not need a translator to know it was an insult. They took him through the city in a vehicle with tinted windows. Daniel caught glimpses of towering buildings and crowds of Valdrin going about their lives. Everything was so big, built for people taller and stronger than humans. He felt small and out of place. That was good. Let them think he was nothing. Let them all underestimate him. The palace rose before them like a mountain of glass and metal. It was enormous, designed to make visitors feel insignificant. The guards led him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. They finally stopped at a door. In a remote wing of the palace, one guard told him these were his quarters. Princess Kira was in the main palace. She would send for him when required. Until then, he should stay here. Daniel entered his rooms alone. They were large and decorated with expensive things, but the location told him everything. He was being kept away from the important areas, out of sight. The rooms had no windows that showed anything interesting. He was a prisoner in a gilded cage. He sat on the edge of the bed and allowed himself one moment of weakness. He thought about Katie and Earth and everything he had left behind. He thought about the weight of what he had to do here. Then he pushed those feelings down and locked them away. Daniel woke up on his first morning on Valdrin Prime and had no idea where he was for a moment. The room was too large, and the light coming through the small window was the wrong color. Then memory came back and he sat up slowly. This was his life now. A young Valdrin woman entered without knocking. She looked annoyed to be there. She told him her name was Lisa and she had been assigned as his attendant. The way she said it made clear this was a punishment for her. She explained the basic rules of the palace in a bored voice, where he could go, which areas were forbidden, when meals would be provided. Then she left before he could ask any questions. The palace was enormous, and Daniel spent his first week getting lost in its corridors. The architecture was designed to intimidate, ceiling soared high above, making him feel tiny. Statues of Valdrin warriors lined the halls, each one depicting some ancient victory. Everything was hard angles and cold surfaces. There was no warmth anywhere. He saw Princess Kira only once during that first week. She passed him in a corridor surrounded by attendants and Guards, she looked right through him as if he did not exist. Her attendants whispered to each other and laughed. Daniel kept his expression neutral and kept walking. He had experienced worse. During his military career, he could handle being ignored. The palace staff treated him with barely concealed contempt when he asked for things. They took their time responding. When he entered a room, conversation stopped. He heard whispers in the Valdran language that he was not supposed to understand. Lucky for him, he had spent 2 years learning Valdran. During his intelligence training, he understood every insult, every cruel joke. He never let on that he knew what they were saying. The food was another challenge. Valdran cuisine was not designed for human digestion. The first few meals made him sick. He learned to identify which items were safe and which would cause problems. He lost weight. Lisa noticed but did not seem to care. When he asked if human food could be provided, she said it was not her problem. 10 days after his arrival, Daniel was summoned to his first formal event. A servant delivered the message in formal clothes that barely fit him. The event was a banquet honoring some military achievement. Daniel dressed carefully and made his way to the great hall. The hall was filled with Valdran nobility. They wore elaborate clothes and expensive jewelry. Daniel felt like a child who had wandered into an adult gathering. Everyone was so tall. He was seated at a table far from the head table where Princess Kira sat with her father, Emperor Dravok. The message was clear. He was not important enough to sit with the royal family. The nobles at his table looked at him with open curiosity and poorly hidden disgust. One of them, a large Valdran with cold eyes, introduced himself as Lord Vex. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He asked Daniel how he was enjoying his stay on Valdran Prime. The way he asked made it clear he hoped the answer was that Daniel was miserable. Daniel responded politely. He said everything was very impressive. Lord Vex laughed and said that of course it was. Valdran civilization was superior to human culture in every way. Their technology was more advanced. Their military was stronger. Their people were better. He said these things casually as if stating obvious facts. Other nobles joined in. They asked Daniel insulting questions, disguised as polite interest. Had he ever served in the military? No, Daniel lied smoothly. He had always been in civil service. They exchanged knowing looks. One asked if he had any combat training at all. Daniel said no, he preferred books to fighting. They laughed at that. Another noble said that a single Valdran warrior could defeat 100 humans. Daniel just smiled mildly and said he did not doubt it. Lord Vex leaned closer and said that perhaps Daniel should return to Earth before he got hurt. The palace could be dangerous for someone so weak and unprepared. It would be unfortunate if an accident happened. The threat was barely veiled. Daniel met his eyes and said softly that he had made a commitment to the peace and intended to honor it. Lord Vex looked disappointed. The meal was torture. Daniel could barely eat the food. The conversations around him were all about military glory and the weakness of other species, especially humans. He sat quietly and let them talk. He noticed things, though, power dynamics between nobles, who deferred to whom, which generals seemed to have influence. He filed away every detail in his memory. After the banquet, Daniel walked back to his quarters alone. The Corridors were dimly lit at night. He heard footsteps behind him and his training kicked in automatically. He became aware of his surroundings in a way he had been suppressing. 3. People following him, trying to be quiet but not quiet enough. He kept walking at the same pace and pretended not to notice. They did not attack, they just wanted to intimidate him. When he reached his quarters, he looked back and saw them watching from a distance. He went inside and locked the door. He stood in the darkness for a long time, breathing slowly, forcing his body to relax. That had been close. For a moment, his real self had almost surfaced. He needed to be more careful. The next day, Daniel discovered the palace library. It was in an old section of the palace that most people seemed to avoid. The room was enormous, filled with thousands of books and data, crystals containing Valdrin knowledge. An elderly Valdrin sat at a desk near the entrance. He looked up when Daniel entered and regarded him with curiosity rather than contempt. The old Valdrin introduced himself as Ares. He was a scholar and had maintained this library for 40 years. He asked what brought Daniel here. Daniel said he wanted to learn about Valdrin history and culture. Ara seemed surprised. Most people, he said, showed no interest in actually understanding the Valdrin. They just assumed they already knew everything worth knowing. Daniel began spending hours in the library every day. He read about Valdrin history, their wars, their philosophy, their art. Ares would sometimes sit with him and explain difficult concepts. The old scholar was different from the other Valdrin. He treated Daniel like a person rather than an inferior species. They had long conversations about culture and civilization. One day, Ares asked Daniel why he had accepted this marriage. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said that after 30 years of war, both sides needed peace. Someone had to take the first step, even if it was difficult. Ares nodded slowly. He said that was a wise answer. Most people, he observed, did not think about the greater good. They only thought about themselves. Through his reading, Daniel learned about the different factions in Valdrin. Politics, there was a military faction that wanted to continue the war. There was a peace faction that believed cooperation was necessary. There were nobles who cared only about power. The emperor tried to balance these groups, but the balance was fragile. Daniel realized that his marriage to Princess Kira was a symbol that different factions interpreted differently. Weeks passed. Daniel established a routine: wake early, exercise in his quarters where no one could see, breakfast alone, spend the day in the library, return to his quarters. He avoided confrontations. When nobles insulted him, he responded with politeness. When they tested him, he showed no reaction. He became almost invisible, just another piece of palace furniture that people stopped noticing. Lisa, his attendant, slowly became less hostile. She started to notice that he always thanked her for small services. He never made unnecessary demands. He treated her with more respect than most nobles showed their servants. One day, she brought him food that was actually suitable for humans. She did not say anything about it. Daniel thanked her sincerely. After that, she was a bit kinder. Princess Kira remained distant. Daniel saw her occasionally at required public events. They would stand together. For photographs, they would exchange formal greetings. Then she would leave as quickly as possible. he did not try to force interaction. That would only make things worse. Better to let her come to him if she ever chose to. He could wait. Patience was something his military training had taught him well. Late one night, Daniel stood on the small balcony attached to his quarters. The city spread out below, glowing with alien lights. 3 moons hung in the purple sky. He thought about Earth and wondered if Katie was looking up at the stars right now. He thought about how strange his life had become. He was surrounded by people who hated him, married to a woman who despised him, living on a world that felt wrong in every way. But he also thought about why he was here. The peace between humans and Valdrin was real, even if it was fragile. Every day that passed without renewed war was a victory. Every insult he endured quietly was a small contribution to that peace. His role was to be a symbol to show that coexistence was possible if he had to be uncomfortable and lonely to achieve that. So be it. Daniel also thought about the intelligence he was gathering. He knew which nobles supported the peace and which wanted war. He knew the structure of palace security and where the weaknesses were. He knew the political currents flowing through the Valdrin government. All of this information was valuable. He sent coded reports back to Earth through carefully hidden channels. He was not just a symbol, he was an asset. As he stood there in the alien night, Daniel allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he usually kept buried. This was harder than any military mission he had ever undertaken, in combat at least. Everyone knew where they stood. 3 months had passed since Daniel arrived on Valdrin Prime. The routine had become familiar, though not comfortable. He had learned to navigate palace life, to avoid the worst of the nobles, to find small moments of peace in the library with Ares. But he could feel something changing in the air. Tensions were rising. News arrived that a human trade vessel had been detained at the border. The Valdrin military claimed the ship violated territorial agreements. Human authorities said the ship was in neutral space. Both sides accused the other of lying. The incident was small, but it reminded everyone how fragile the peace really was. Daniel noticed increased activity in the palace, more military officers coming and going, urgent meetings behind closed doors. Lord Vex and his faction of Warhawks seemed energized. They moved through the palace with confident smiles, as if they knew something good was about to happen. Daniel sent a coded message to Earth, warning them that the situation was deteriorating. One afternoon, Daniel was summoned to attend a meeting of the High Council. This was unusual. He had never been invited to observe before. Lisa brought him the message and looked worried. She whispered that she had heard the meeting would be difficult. Daniel thanked her and went. The council chamber was impressive and intimidating. Emperor Dravok sat on a raised throne. Princess Kira stood to his right. Around the room sat the most powerful nobles and generals in the Valdrin government. Daniel was directed to a small seat in the back, almost out of sight. He was there to be seen, not heard. General Kron stood to address the council. He was a massive Valdrin with scars covering his face. He spoke about the detained ship and other incidents. He said humans were testing Valdrin resolve. He argued that the peace treaty had been a mistake that made them look weak. Other species watched and wondered if the mighty Valdrin had lost their strength. Lord Vex spoke next. He pointed at Daniel without looking at him. The marriage alliance, he said, was supposed to strengthen peace. Instead, it had become a symbol of humiliation. They had taken a weak human bureaucrat as the husband of a royal princess. What message did that send? He suggested strongly that Daniel be sent back to Earth, and the marriage dissolved. Other voices joined in. Some defended the peace, others called for strength. The debate grew heated. Emperor Dravok listened to all sides without speaking. Princess Kira stood silent, her face unreadable. Daniel sat very still, knowing that everyone expected him to be intimidated and silent. Then General Kron turned and addressed Daniel directly. He asked if the human had anything to say. Was he afraid? Did he understand that his presence here insulted every Valdrin warrior? The room went quiet. Everyone watched Daniel. This was a test. They expected him to stammer or beg or show weakness. Daniel stood slowly. He kept his voice calm and level. He said that he understood the general's concerns. War was familiar and peace was difficult, but he asked the council to consider the cost of renewed conflict. 30 years of war had killed billions on both sides. Entire worlds had burned. Both civilizations had been pushed to the edge of collapse. Starting again would not lead to victory. It would lead to mutual destruction. He spoke without passion or drama, just cold logic. He cited casualty figures, economic data, resource depletion. He explained how neither side could afford another decade of war, let alone another 30 years. His words carried weight because he spoke like someone who had studied war extensively, which of course he had. The room stayed silent when he finished and sat down. General Kron looked angry but had no immediate response to the facts Daniel presented. Emperor Dravok nodded thoughtfully. Princess Kira glanced at Daniel with something that might have been surprise. The meeting continued, but the tone had shifted slightly. Daniel had shown that he was not completely ignorant, even if they still believed he was weak. That evening, Daniel returned to his quarters, feeling exhausted. Speaking in the council had been risky. He had revealed more intelligence than a simple bureaucrat should possess, but staying silent would have been worse. At least now they might see him as somewhat educated rather than completely useless. Late that night, Daniel heard sounds in the corridor outside his door. Footsteps. Trying to be quiet, he was instantly alert. Years of training made his senses sharp, even when he was pretending to be harmless. He moved away from the door and positioned himself in the room where he would have options if someone entered. The door lock was being manipulated. Someone was breaking in. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. Palace security would not break into his quarters. This was either a robbery or something worse. The lock clicked open. 3 figures entered. Moving fast, they wore dark clothes and carried blades. Everything happened in seconds. The first attacker moved toward Daniel. For just an instant, Daniel's training took over completely. His body moved before his mind could stop it. He sidestepped the blade thrust, grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted it at the precise angle to make the fingers release the weapon. The blade fell. Daniel caught it and spun, using the attacker's own momentum to send him crashing into the second attacker. The third attacker lunged. Daniel moved like water flowing around the attack. He struck twice, precise hits to nerve clusters that would cause pain but not Permanent damage. The third attacker dropped. The first two were getting up. Daniel disarmed them both with moves that were almost too fast to see. Within 10 seconds of the attack starting, all three attackers were on the floor, disarmed, groaning. Then Daniel heard a sound from the doorway. He looked up and saw Princess Kira standing there. She had witnessed the last few seconds of the fight. Her eyes were wide with shock. Palace guards rushed past her into the room. They saw the three attackers on the floor and immediately restrained them. Daniel quickly adopted his harmless expression. He stammered something about getting lucky. The attackers must have been poorly trained. Anyone could have defended themselves against such clumsy efforts. His hands trembled slightly, though now it was from adrenaline rather than fear. The guards looked skeptical, but said nothing. Princess Kira continued to stare at Daniel. She had seen how he moved. That was not luck. That was skill, extensive training. She opened her mouth to say something, but then closed it again. The guards took the attackers away. More guards came to secure the room. In all the commotion, Princess Kira left without speaking to Daniel. Daniel sat on his bed after everyone left. His hands were actually shaking now. He had made a terrible mistake. He had let his real abilities show. Princess Kira had seen she would have questions. His cover was compromised. He sat in the dark and tried to think of how to handle this. The next morning, a servant brought a message. Princess Kira wanted to see him immediately. This was the first time she had requested his presence privately. Daniel knew what was coming. He prepared himself as best he could and went to her chambers. Princess Kira dismissed her attendants when Daniel arrived. They were alone in a sitting room. She looked at him with an expression he could not read. Then she spoke. She asked him directly who he really was. That fighting skill she witnessed was not something a bureaucrat possessed. She wanted the truth. Daniel tried to deflect. He said he had taken some self-defense classes. She cut him off. She was not stupid. She had seen enough combat to know real skill when she saw it. The way he moved was professional. Trained. He was military, probably special forces. She demanded to know why Earth had sent a soldier disguised as a diplomat. Daniel stayed silent. He could not confirm or deny. Either way would cause problems. Princess Kira stepped closer. She said he had a choice. He could tell her the truth, or she could tell her father that the human husband was actually a spy. That would end the peace treaty immediately. War would start again. Was that what he wanted? Daniel met her eyes. He said quietly that if he told her the truth, she might wish he had stayed silent. Some secrets were better left buried. She said she would take that risk. She needed to know if she had been lied to from the beginning. They stood there in silence for a long moment. Daniel made a decision. He told her that she was right. He had military training. Before becoming a diplomat, he had served in combat roles. He had skills that most civilians did not possess. That was all he could say. It was not the full truth, but it was more than he had admitted to anyone else. Princess Kira asked why he had hidden this. Why pretend to be weak and harmless? Daniel said that was complicated. If the Valdrin had known they were getting a military officer, even a retired one, it would have been seen as a threat. It would have undermined the peace. So he played a role. He let everyone think he was nothing special. It was what the Situation required Princess Kiera. Absorbed this, she said she needed time to think. She told Daniel to leave. As he reached the door, she spoke again. She said that whoever he really was, the 3 attackers from last night had been trying to kill him. Someone wanted him dead. He should be more careful. Then she turned away and Daniel left, walking back to his quarters. Daniel knew everything had changed. Princess Kiera suspected the truth, even if she did not know all the details. His cover was damaged. The attacks meant someone saw him as enough of a threat to want him eliminated. The careful game he had been playing was falling apart. He needed to decide what to do next. The crisis came suddenly, like a storm that had been building on the horizon. News spread through the palace that a human colony on the border had been attacked. Buildings destroyed, people killed. The attackers appeared to be a rogue Valdrin military unit. Both governments scrambled to investigate, but damage was done. Human populations across space demanded action. Valdrin Warhawks claimed it was a false flag operation by humans to justify aggression. Emperor Dravok called an emergency council meeting. Daniel was not invited this time. He heard about it from Lisa, who looked frightened. She said the council was voting to exile Daniel and dissolve the marriage treaty. General Kron was demanding it. Lord Vex was spreading rumors that Daniel himself had orchestrated the attack. The situation was spiraling out of control. Daniel sent urgent messages to Earth. Through his encrypted channels, he warned them not to respond militarily. Yet, he suspected the border attack was staged by conspirators trying to restart the war. Give him time to investigate. The response came back quickly. Earth would hold position for 72 hours. After that, they would have no choice but to mobilize. Public pressure was too strong. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He paced his quarters and tried to think. Everything was falling apart. All the months of careful work, of swallowing pride, of maintaining his cover, it was all about to be wasted. War would start again. Billions would die and he would be sent home having failed his mission. Just after midnight, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Daniel rushed to his door and looked out. Palace guards were running through the corridors. Shots were being fired somewhere distant. Something was very wrong. A guard ran past and Daniel grabbed his arm. The guard tried to push him away, but Daniel held firm and demanded to know what was happening. The guard said there was a coup. Traitors had attacked. Then he pulled free and ran. Daniel went back into his quarters and immediately opened a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was equipment he had smuggled in piece by piece over months. Communication gear, weapons, items he hoped never to need. He armed himself and slipped into the corridor. His entire demeanor changed. The harmless bureaucrat was gone. Now he moved like the soldier he had always been. He made his way through the palace using service corridors he had memorized. Twice he encountered conspirators. Both times he took them down silently. He was heading toward Princess Kiera's chambers. If there was a coup, the royal family would be targets. He needed to know what was happening. He found Princess Kiera in a maintenance corridor. She was alone, breathing hard, a blade in her hand. Blood stained her sleeve, but she was standing. She looked up as Daniel approached and raised her weapon. Then she recognized him and lowered it. She said the conspirators had struck during the state ceremony. Emperor Dravok and most of the court were being held hostage in the throne room. She had barely escaped. Daniel assessed the situation quickly. He asked who was leading the coup. Princess Kira said, Lord Vex and General Cone. They believed, with the Emperor neutralized and war restarting with humans, they could seize power and establish a military government. Most of palace security had been compromised. The loyal forces were scattered and confused. Princess Kira looked at Daniel with intensity. She said she needed the truth now. No more games. Who was he really? Could he help? Or was he just a diplomat who got lucky fighting off some assassins? Daniel met her eyes and made a decision. He told her the truth. Before becoming a diplomat, he had been Commander Daniel Carter of Earth Special Operations. Over 12 years of combat experience, over 200 mission skills most soldiers never developed. He was here because Earth needed someone who could survive in hostile territory. Princess Kira stared at him, then she asked why he had not revealed this before. Daniel said that the moment he showed his true capabilities, he would become a threat. The peace faction would distrust him. The war faction would demand his removal. By appearing weak and harmless, he could gather intelligence and work for peace without becoming a target. Obviously, that plan had failed since someone tried to kill him anyway. Princess Kira was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had misjudged him badly. She had thought he was weak. Instead, he had been strong enough to let everyone believe he was weak. That took a different kind of courage. She asked if he could help save her father and stop this coup. Daniel said he would try, but he needed information. Palace layout, security systems, which forces were still loyal. They found a safe room, and Princess Kira provided what she knew. Daniel asked questions that revealed his military expertise: force deployments, communication networks, vulnerabilities, and palace defenses. Princess Kira watched him work and realized she was seeing a completely different person. This was not the quiet man who spent his days in the library. This was a professional warrior planning an operation. Daniel outlined a plan. First, they needed to reach the royal guard barracks outside the palace. Those forces were loyal to the emperor but cut off from leadership. With Princess Kira to confirm orders, they could rally those troops. Second, infiltrate the palace using passages known only to the royal family. Free the hostages. Third, capture or neutralize Lord Vex and General Cone. Without leadership, the coup would collapse. Princess Kira said the plan was dangerous. Daniel agreed, but said doing nothing was worse. Conspirators would execute Emperor Dravok and anyone loyal to him. Then they would blame humans for everything and launch a war. Millions would die. This was their only chance to stop it. Princess Kira looked at him and nodded. She said they should move. They made their way out of the palace through old tunnels. Daniel moved with confidence. Now that his cover was dropped, Princess Kira kept pace beside him. She was trained in combat as all Valdrin royalty were. Together they moved efficiently. When they encountered guards loyal to the conspirators, Daniel handled them with brutal efficiency. Princess Kira watched and understood why the Valdrin military had struggled so much during the war. Humans like Daniel were terrifying opponents. They reached the barracks as dawn was breaking. The royal guards were armed and confused. Their officers had been killed in the initial coup. They did not know who to trust. Princess Kira stepped forward and identified herself. She explained what had happened and ordered them to prepare for a counter-assault. Some guards were skeptical until Daniel spoke up. He laid out the tactical situation with precision, enemy positions likely, reinforcements timing. He spoke like someone who had planned 100 similar operations. The guards recognized competence when they saw it. An old sergeant asked Princess Kira who this human was. She said he was Commander Carter, and they should listen to him. The sergeant nodded and began organizing troops. Within an hour they had a force of 200 loyal guards ready to move. Daniel split them into teams with specific objectives. The main force would assault the throne room. Smaller teams would secure key locations and cut off escape routes. Princess Kira would lead the main assault since the troops needed to see her. Daniel would take a small team to neutralize General Kron, who was commanding the conspirator forces. Before they moved out, Princess Kira pulled Daniel aside. She said she wanted to apologize. For months she had treated him as inferior. She had believed he was weak and useless. She had been wrong, Daniel said. There was nothing to apologize for. He had worked hard to make everyone believe exactly that. It meant his cover had been effective. She smiled slightly and said he was either very good at his job or completely crazy, probably both. The assault began with Daniel's team infiltrating through the royal passages. They moved silently through the palace, taking out sentries. Daniel led from the front, his training and experience evident in every movement. They reached the security center and captured it quickly. Now they had control of internal sensors and could coordinate the main assault. Princess Kira led the main force through the palace entrance. The conspirators had not expected a coordinated attack so soon. They were overwhelmed. Fighting was intense but brief. The royal guards were motivated and angry. They pushed through resistance and reached the throne room. Inside, Lord Vex held Emperor Dravok at blade point. He demanded the assault stop or he would kill the emperor. There was a tense standoff. Then Daniel's voice came through the communication system. He said Lord Vex should look behind him. Vex turned and saw Daniel standing in a hidden entrance with weapons trained on him. Daniel had infiltrated while everyone was focused on the main assault. Vex hesitated. Daniel told him to drop the blade. It was over. The coup had failed. Vex could surrender and face trial or die here. Vex looked around and saw his forces were defeated. He dropped the blade. Royal guards rushed in and secured the hostages. Emperor Dravok was safe. General Kron tried to escape with his remaining troops. Daniel pursued him to the courtyard. Kron turned and saw the human who everyone had mocked for months. He laughed and challenged Daniel to single combat. He expected Daniel to refuse and prove his cowardice. Instead, Daniel accepted. The fight was brief. Kron was larger and stronger. Daniel was faster and more skilled. He moved around Kron's attacks, landing precise strikes. Within a minute, Kron was disarmed and on his knees. Daniel could have killed him easily. Instead, he showed mercy. The palace felt different in the days after the coup. The tension that had filled every corridor was gone, replaced with something cautious but hopeful. The conspirators were imprisoned. Emperor Dravok had survived. The peace treaty was secure. Most importantly, the Truth about Daniel had fundamentally changed how everyone saw him. Daniel walked through the palace now, and nobles who had mocked him stepped aside. Respectfully, guards who had ignored him offered salutes. Servants who had barely acknowledged his existence now greeted him warmly. It was strange. After months of being invisible, he was not sure he liked the attention any more than he had liked the contempt. Lisa found him in the library 3 days after the coup. She looked embarrassed. She said she wanted to apologize for how she had treated him. When he first arrived, she had been rude and unhelpful. She had not known who he really was. Daniel told her there was no need to apologize. She had just been doing her job. Besides, he had worked hard to seem like someone not worth paying attention to. She smiled and said he had certainly succeeded. Aris, the old scholar, seemed unsurprised by the revelation. When Daniel came to the library, Aris said he had suspected Daniel was more than he appeared. No bureaucrat spent that much time studying military history and tactical analysis. Daniel asked why Aris had never said anything. Aris replied that everyone deserved their secrets. Besides, he had enjoyed their conversations regardless of who Daniel really was. Emperor Dravok summoned Daniel to a private meeting. The emperor looked tired but determined. He thanked Daniel formally for saving his life and the lives of his family. He said he understood now why Earth had sent someone with military experience. The situation had been more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. Daniel had proven himself not just as a warrior, but as someone who valued peace enough to sacrifice his pride for it. The emperor asked Daniel about the border attack that had sparked the crisis. Daniel explained his analysis. The timing had been too convenient. The attackers used Valdran equipment, but their tactics were sloppy, not consistent with trained military units. He believed Lord Vex and General Kron had staged the attack to create a justification for dissolving the peace treaty. Emperor Dravok nodded. His investigators had reached the same conclusion. A week after the coup, Emperor Dravok held a formal ceremony in the Grand Hall. Representatives from across Valdran space attended. Daniel stood uncomfortably in formal clothes while the emperor addressed the crowd. Dravok spoke about courage and sacrifice. He said true strength was not just about physical power but about wisdom and restraint. Commander Daniel Carter, he said, exemplified both. The emperor awarded Daniel the Star of Valdran, the highest civilian honor. He also formally recognized Daniel as Prince Consort with full rights and privileges of the royal family. The crowd applauded. Many of them were the same nobles who had insulted Daniel just weeks before. Now they cheered for him. Daniel found the whole situation deeply ironic. When asked to speak, Daniel kept his words brief. He said he had not acted alone. Princess Kira had shown tremendous courage. The loyal guards had risked everything. Lisa and others had provided crucial information. He was just one person in a larger effort to preserve peace. That peace was what mattered most. The crowd applauded again, but Daniel saw that some people understood what he was really saying. This was not about individuals. It was about choosing cooperation over conflict. The relationship between Daniel and Princess Kira changed dramatically after the coup. They spent more time together, partly because protocol now required it as Prince Consort, but also because they genuinely wanted to, they had fought. Side by side, they had trusted each other with their lives. That created bond that formal arrangements never could. Princess Kira admitted one evening that she had been wrong about humans. She had believed they were weak because Valdrin culture defined strength narrowly, but watching Daniel endure months of mockery without retaliating, maintaining his cover even when insulted, that required strength she had not understood. He could have revealed himself at any time and demanded respect. Instead, he chose to appear weak because it served a greater purpose. Daniel said he had learned things too. He had arrived thinking Valdrin were just warriors who valued nothing but combat, but people like Era showed him their culture valued wisdom and knowledge. Princess Kira herself was more than just a warrior princess. She was intelligent and thoughtful. The Valdrin people were complex just like humans. Seeing them as one-dimensional had been his own prejudice. They began working together on practical matters. Daniel proposed a formal cultural exchange program between human and world. Students from both civilizations would study together, artists would collaborate, scientists would share research. Princess Kira became passionate about the idea. She argued for it in council meetings with the same intensity she brought to military matters. The program faced resistance from traditionalists on both sides. Some Valdrin nobles thought it would dilute their superior culture. Some human politicians worried about giving Valdrin access to human innovations. Daniel and Princess Kira addressed these concerns patiently. They pointed out that the war had cost both civilizations terribly. Building genuine understanding now would prevent future conflicts. Slowly the program gained support. The first exchange students arrived within months. Young Valdrin came to Earth. Universities, young humans traveled to Valdrinmes. The early reports were positive. Students were curious about each other rather than hostile. They found common ground in unexpected ways. Daniel received regular updates and felt genuine hope for the first time since arriving on Valdrin Prime. One evening, Daniel and Princess Kira walked through the palace gardens. It was the first time they had done something without it being an official duty. They talked about small things, their childhood's favorite foods, simple pleasures they missed. The conversation was easy and comfortable. At one point, Princess Kira said she was glad Earth had sent him specifically. Daniel asked why. She said because he understood what she had learned from the power without wisdom was dangerous, strength without compassion was empty. Daniel received a message from Katie, his sister on Earth. She had watched the broadcasts of the ceremony. She said she had always known he was special, but seeing the Valdrin honor him made her incredibly proud. She asked when she could visit. Daniel realized with surprise that he wanted that. He wanted his sister to see his new life. He wanted her to meet Princess Kira. He was building something here that felt real. Problems still existed. A border incident flared up when a Valdrin patrol ship and a human cruiser had a confrontation over territorial boundaries. Daniel and Princess Kira traveled together to mediate. They met with commanders from both sides and worked through the misunderstanding. Daniel's reputation as a warrior made the Valdrin respect his opinions. Princess Kira's authority made both sides listen together. They diffused the situation. The successful mediation became a model for handling future disputes instead of letting incidents escalate. Both governments now sent joint teams to investigate and resolve issues quickly. Daniel and Princess Kira often led these efforts. Their partnership proved that cooperation between humans and Valdrin was not just possible but effective. Daniel also began working with select Valdrin military officers. They wanted to understand human tactical doctrine. He taught classes on asymmetric warfare, strategic flexibility, and unconventional thinking. The Valdrin officers were initially skeptical but soon recognized value in approaches that differed from their rigid military traditions. One general told Daniel that humans fought like water flowing around obstacles rather than smashing through them. Daniel took that as a compliment. Late one night, Daniel stood on the balcony of his quarters and looked out at the city, the same view he had seen when he first arrived, but now it felt different. This was becoming home, not in the way Earth was home, but in a new way. He had built relationships here. He had made a difference. The mission he had started had evolved into something more than gathering intelligence or maintaining cover. Princess Kira found him there. She stood beside him and they watched the city lights in comfortable silence. After a while she said she had been thinking about their marriage. It had started as a political arrangement that neither of them wanted, but perhaps it could become something more genuine. Daniel looked at her and said he had been thinking the same thing. She reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. They stood there together as the twin moons rose over the city. Daniel thought about the journey that had brought him here, the decision to volunteer, the months of being underestimated and mocked, the moment when his cover had been blown and everything changed, the coup and the revelation of his true capabilities, and now this moment, standing beside someone who understood him in ways he had not expected. Princess Kira said quietly that she had never imagined her political marriage would lead to this. Daniel said he had not either, but sometimes the unexpected paths were the ones worth walking. She smiled and agreed. They stayed on the balcony until dawn, talking about the future they would build together, not as strangers forced into an arrangement, but as partners who had chosen each other despite everything. 1 year had passed since the coup. Daniel stood at a window in the palace and watched ships arrive at the spaceport. Representatives from dozens of worlds were coming for the anniversary celebration of the peace treaty. The event would be broadcast across human and Valdrin space. It was a chance to show everyone that the alliance was not just surviving but thriving. Princess Kira entered the room and stood beside him. She had changed over the past year. She smiled more often now. She spoke about cooperation and cultural exchange with genuine enthusiasm. The rigid warrior princess who had viewed Daniel with contempt was gone, replaced by someone more complex and interesting. Daniel liked to think he had changed too, though in different ways. They reviewed the schedule for the celebration together, speeches, diplomatic meetings, cultural performances from both civilizations. Daniel was nervous about his speech. Princess Kira assured him he would do fine. People respected him now. They wanted to hear what he had to say. He reminded her that a year ago those same people had mocked him. She said that just proved people could change their minds when given good reasons. Katie arrived 2 days before the celebration. Daniel had not seen his sister in over a year. When she stepped off the transport, he barely recognized her. She had cut her hair short and looked more confident than he remembered. They embraced, and she whispered that she had missed him terribly. Daniel felt emotions he had been keeping controlled for months threatening to surface. He pushed them down and smiled at her. He showed Katie around the palace. She was amazed by everything, the scale of the architecture, the alien beauty of it. She met Princess Kira, and the two women liked each other immediately. Katie told embarrassing stories about Daniel as a child. Princess Kira shared her own observations about his habits and quirks. Daniel listened to them bond over making fun of him and realized he was happy. That evening, Katie asked Daniel privately if he was truly happy. Here, he considered the question carefully. He said it was complicated. He missed Earth, he missed human food and familiar skies, but he had built something meaningful here. His work mattered. His relationship with Princess Kira had become real. So yes, he was happy, though not in the way he had imagined happiness would feel. Katie said she could see the difference in him. He seemed more at peace, less like he was carrying the weight of the world alone. Daniel laughed and said, maybe that was because he had help now. Princess Kira carried some of that weight with him. It made the burden easier. Katie smiled and said she approved of Princess Kira. Daniel should hold on to someone like that. The celebration began with a formal ceremony. In the Great Hall, hundreds of dignitaries filled the space. Emperor Dravok gave the opening speech, talking about the progress made in the past year. Trade between human and Valdran worlds had increased dramatically. The cultural exchange program had exceeded expectations. Military cooperation on border security had prevented incidents from escalating. The peace was working. When Daniel was introduced to speak, the audience applauded. He walked to the podium and looked out at the crowd. Year ago, many of these same people had viewed him as weak and worthless. Now, they listened respectfully. He began by acknowledging how far they had all come. Both humans and Valdran had learned difficult lessons. They had learned that their assumptions about each other were often wrong. Daniel spoke about seeing beyond surface appearances. He said that when he first arrived, many Valdrans saw only a weak human. They judged him by their own standards and found him lacking, but strength came in many forms. Endurance was strength. Patience was strength. The willingness to be misunderstood for a greater purpose was strength. He had learned that lesson from Valdran culture, which valued honor and sacrifice. He also spoke about what humans had learned. Humans had assumed Valdran were just warriors obsessed with power, but he had discovered scholars like Ares who valued knowledge. He had seen ordinary Valdran who wanted peace as much as anyone. Princess Kira had shown him that strength and wisdom could exist together. Both civilizations were more complex than their stereotypes suggested. The key, Daniel said, was choosing to see that complexity, choosing to look past first impressions and prejudices, choosing cooperation over conflict, even when it was difficult. The peace treaty had given them a framework. Now they had to build something real within that framework. Every cultural exchange, every trade agreement, every friendship between humans and Valdran made the peace stronger. When he finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. Daniel returned to his seat beside Princess Kira. She leaned close and said, "That was a good speech." He had spoken from the heart rather than just saying what people wanted to hear. Daniel said he hoped it made a difference. She assured him it would. Over the next 2 days, the celebration continued. There were cultural performances showcasing both human and Valran art. A joint military demonstration showed how forces from both civilizations now trained together. Students from the exchange program spoke about their experiences. Everywhere Daniel looked, he saw evidence that the peace was becoming real and lasting. During a quiet moment, Daniel found himself talking with several Valdran military officers. They asked him questions about human tactical thinking. One young officer said he had studied human campaigns during the war and was impressed by their creativity. Daniel said humans had to be creative because they were usually outnumbered and outgunned. Necessity drove innovation. The officer nodded thoughtfully and said, "Perhaps that was a lesson Valdran forces needed to learn." Ares, the elderly scholar, attended the celebration despite his age and preference for solitude. He found Daniel and said he was proud of what had been accomplished. When they first met, he had seen a young human trying to understand an alien culture. Now he saw someone who had become a bridge between worlds. That was a rare and valuable thing. Daniel thanked him and said none of it would have been possible without Ares teaching him about Valdran history and philosophy. On the final day of the celebration, Princess Kira made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Daniel. She declared the establishment of a new joint academy where human and Valdran students would train together in both civilian and military fields. The academy would teach both cultures approaches to problem solving. Graduates would serve as ambassadors and peacekeepers working to maintain the alliance their peoples had built. The announcement generated immediate discussion. Some traditionalists objected, some progressives celebrated. Emperor Dravok voiced his support, which made the academy official. Princess Kira looked at Daniel, and he understood this was her way of ensuring what they had started would continue after they were gone. Future generations would grow up seeing cooperation as normal rather than exceptional. As the celebration ended and guests began departing, Daniel walked Katie back to her transport. She said she was impressed by everything she had seen. The palace, the people, the genuine progress toward lasting peace. She could see why Daniel had stayed. This was important work. He was making a real difference. She hugged him and made him promise to visit Earth sometime. He said he would try. After Katie left, Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions. He was happy about the success of the celebration, proud of what had been accomplished, but also aware of how much still needed to be done. The peace was stronger but not unbreakable. There would be more challenges ahead, more incidents to manage, more prejudices to overcome. The work was far from finished. That evening, Daniel and Princess Kira sat together in the palace gardens. The formal events were over, and they could finally relax. She asked him what he was thinking about. He said he was thinking about the future, about the academy she had announced, about the children who would grow up in a galaxy where humans and Valdran worked together. She said that was a good future to work toward. Princess Kira then said she had something to tell him. She had been hesitant because it changed things, but They had always been honest with each other. She was pregnant. They were going to have a child. Daniel sat very still, processing this information. A child, half human, half a living symbol of what their peoples were building together. He asked how she felt about it. She said she was scared but also excited. Their child would face challenges neither of them could fully prepare for. Being neither fully human nor fully Valdrin would be difficult. But their child would also have opportunities no one else had. The ability to understand both cultures intimately, to bridge divides that seemed impossible to cross. Daniel took her hand and said they would figure it out together. They sat in the garden as night fell. Daniel thought about how much had changed since he first arrived on Valdrin Prime. He had come expecting to endure isolation and contempt for the sake of duty. Instead, he had found purpose and partnership. He had helped stop a coup and preserve peace. He had built genuine relationships, and now he was going to be a father. Princess Kira leaned against him and said she never imagined their arranged marriage would become this. Daniel agreed. Life had a way of surprising you. The political marriage that was supposed to be a burden had become the foundation of something real and meaningful. They had chosen each other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That made all the difference. 5 years had passed since Daniel first arrived on Valdrin Prime. He stood in the nursery, watching his daughter Alina sleep. She was 3 years old now, with her mother's amber eyes and her father's messy brown hair. Her skin had a subtle blue tint that was beautiful. She was the first human Valdrin hybrid child, and she was perfect. Alina had changed everything. Her birth had generated enormous interest across both civilizations. Scientists studied her genetics and confirmed that humans and Valdrin were more compatible than anyone expected. Politicians pointed to her as proof that the two species could build a shared future, but to Daniel she was just his daughter, smart, curious, and absolutely fearless in the way only small children could be. Princess Kira entered the nursery quietly. She stood beside Daniel and watched Alina sleep. She said their daughter had worn out 3 attendants today. Alina wanted to explore everything and climbed things that made the palace staff nervous. Daniel smiled. Alina definitely inherited her mother's determination and physical abilities, plus maybe a bit of her father's tendency to assess situations tactically. Yesterday she had figured out how to reach the high shelves by stacking furniture. The galaxy had changed significantly in 5 years. The alliance between humanity and the Valdrin sovereignty was now firmly established. Trade flourished. The joint academy Princess Kira had announced was thriving with hundreds of students. Mixed crews of humans and Valdrin served on exploration vessels pushing into unknown space. What had started as a fragile peace had become genuine cooperation. Daniel's role had evolved far beyond what anyone initially imagined. He served as a senior advisor to Emperor Dravok on both military and diplomatic matters. He commanded respect from Valdrin officers who once would have mocked him. He traveled frequently between human and Valdrin worlds, mediating disputes and strengthening ties. His influence was significant, though he tried to use it carefully. Princess Kira had also changed. She led the progressive faction in Valdrin politics, advocating for continued cultural exchange and reform. She argued that Valdran society needed to value more than just military strength. Education, art, science, compassion. These things mattered too. Many older nobles resisted, but younger Valdran embraced her vision. Change was happening slowly, but it was happening. One morning, Daniel received an urgent message. An unknown alien species had been detected at the galactic rim. Their ships were massive and their technology was advanced. Initial contact attempts had been met with hostility. Several border stations had been attacked. This was a threat to both humans and Valdran. The Galactic Council was convening an emergency session. Daniel and Princess Kira traveled to the council station. Together, the chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all concerned about this new threat. The leader of the unknown species, who called themselves the Zorith, appeared on the communication screen. They demanded that all species in this region of space submit to their authority or face destruction. They viewed the existing civilizations as weak and disorganized. The council chamber erupted in arguments. Some species wanted to fight immediately. Others proposed negotiation. A few suggested retreating to defensible positions. Daniel listened to the chaos and realized something important. 5 years ago, humans and Valdran would have been arguing with each other rather than facing external threats together. The alliance had made them both stronger. Emperor Dravok stood and proposed that the council form a unified defense force. Humanity and the Valdran sovereignty would contribute ships and troops. Other species should do the same, but they needed coordinated leadership. He surprised everyone by nominating Daniel to command the joint forces. Several council members objected. Why should a human command forces that included Valdran warriors? Valdran general named Corvin stood. He said he had fought against Daniel during the war and later trained with him. During the peace, Daniel understood both human and Valdran military doctrine. He could think unconventionally while respecting tradition. Most importantly, he had proven he could unite different peoples toward common goals. If anyone could command a truly joint force, it was Commander Carter. Other voices joined in support. A human admiral spoke about Daniel's tactical brilliance. An alien diplomat mentioned his fairness and wisdom. Princess Kira stood and said Daniel had spent 5 years building bridges between civilizations. Now he had a chance to defend those bridges. The council voted, and Daniel was confirmed as supreme commander of the Joint Defense Force. Daniel accepted the position with mixed feelings. He understood the responsibility being placed on him. Lives would depend on his decisions, but he also felt ready. 5 years of diplomatic work had taught him patience and coalition building. His military background gave him the skills to plan effective operations, and he had Princess Kira to help manage the political aspects. Together they would face this challenge. The Joint Defense Force assembled quickly. Human ships with their innovative designs. Valdran vessels built for power and durability. Smaller contributions from other council species. Daniel organized them into integrated squadrons that combined different strengths. He appointed officers based on ability rather than species. The force was diverse but united in purpose. Princess Kira took on the role of diplomatic coordinator, while Daniel prepared military Responses: she worked to keep the political coalition together. Some species were more committed than others. Some had old grievances with each other. She navigated these tensions with skill, reminding everyone that the Zorath threat affected them all equally. Unity was not optional, it was survival. The first major engagement with the Zorath came at a strategic system near the border. Daniel's forces were outnumbered, but he used the diversity of his fleet to advantage. Human ships engaged in hit-and-run tactics that confused the Zorath. Valdrin ships held key positions with their superior firepower. Smaller allied vessels provided support and reconnaissance. The battle was hard-fought, but the joint forces held the line. News of the victory spread quickly. It boosted morale and proved that the alliance could face external threats effectively. Daniel addressed the fleet after the battle. He praised the courage and skill of all involved. He emphasized that they had won because they worked together, combining their different strengths into something greater than any one species could achieve alone. That was the lesson they needed to remember. Over the following months, the conflict continued. The Zorath were powerful, but the joint forces adapted and learned. Daniel's command style emphasized flexibility and initiative. He gave his officers clear objectives, but trusted them to determine how to achieve those objectives. This approach worked well with the diverse species under his command. Each brought their own methods but worked toward common goals. During a brief leave, Daniel returned to Valdrin Prime to see his family. Alina had grown and missed him terribly. She showed him drawings she had made of spaceships and told him elaborate stories about adventures with aliens. Daniel held her close and promised he would come home safely. Princess Kira watched them together and felt grateful that their arranged marriage had become a real family worth protecting. The war with the Zorath eventually reached a turning point. Daniel planned a major operation, targeting their supply lines and forcing them to overextend. The operation required perfect coordination between multiple species forces. It was risky, but Daniel believed it would work. Princess Kira supported the plan politically, convincing council members to commit their resources fully. The operation succeeded brilliantly. The Zor were forced to withdraw and eventually agreed to negotiations. They had expected the council species to be disorganized and easy to conquer. Instead, they found a unified front that combined the best qualities of many civilizations. The peace terms were favorable to the council. The Zorath would respect established borders and engage in trade rather than conquest. When Daniel returned to Valdrin Prime after the war, he received a hero's welcome, but what mattered most to him was seeing Alina run toward him with her arms outstretched. He picked her up and held her while she chatted about everything he had missed. Princess Kira embraced them both. This was what he had fought for, not glory or recognition, but the chance for his daughter to grow up in a peaceful galaxy. The Joint Academy expanded to include Zorath students. The cultural exchange programs grew to encompass more species. The alliance that had started with just humans in Valdrin became a model for galactic cooperation. Daniel watched these developments with satisfaction. What had started as a sacrifice, accepting a political marriage he did not want, had grown into something that changed the galaxy. On the 10-year anniversary of his arrival on Valdrin Prime, Daniel stood with Princess Kira and Alina at a ceremony, dedicating a monument to peace. The monument showed humans and Valdrin, standing together, hands joined. Alina asked why the monument was important. Daniel explained that it reminded people that once their two species had been enemies. Through courage and determination, they had become friends and allies. That was a story worth remembering. Princess Kira added that sometimes the hardest battles were not fought with weapons but with patience and understanding. Breaking down walls of prejudice required more courage than fighting wars.